Everyone wears a mask, but awakening begins when you stop fearing what lies beneath. The purpose is not to tear masks away from others, it is to hold space for what those masks were built to protect. The moment you understand this, you begin to see people clearly, not as actors in a play, but as souls trying to stay safe in a world that often punishes honesty. Awareness, then, is not about exposure, it is about grace, the quiet realization that behind every mask is a face longing to be seen, and perhaps, your own. Every judgment we make is a mirror turned outward. We believe we are describing others, but often we are unconsciously describing ourselves. The things that irritate us, the flaws we point out, the people who provoke us, all carry fragments of what we've denied within. What we hate most in others is often what we have not yet made peace with in ourselves. Nietzsche understood this with cutting clarity. He saw projection not as a moral failure, but as a psychological reflex, the mind's way of hiding from its own reflection. When we are unable to accept certain parts of ourselves, we exile them. Yet what we cast away does not disappear, it waits in the shadows, disguised as judgment. It reappears in our irritation toward others, in our harsh opinions, in our quiet resentment. The outer conflict is merely the inner one made visible. When you catch yourself criticizing someone, pause. Ask gently, what part of me is reacting? Often, it's the part that once felt unseen, unworthy, or ashamed. We project our buried stories onto others because it feels safer to fight them outside than to face them within. The person you call arrogant may mirror the confidence you wish you could embody. The one you call dishonest may remind you of the times you betrayed your own truth. The one you dismiss as cold may awaken your fear of emotional distance. Awareness begins when you stop treating judgment as certainty and start treating it as information. Every irritation becomes an invitation. Each reaction whispers, look here. There's something unresolved. This shift transforms conflict into self-discovery. Instead of blaming, you begin listening, not to the noise of others, but to the echo of your own unhealed places. To grow, you must reclaim what you once rejected. The light of awareness is not gentle at first, it exposes what's been buried. But if you meet it with honesty, judgment turns to understanding, and understanding to compassion. You begin to see that everyone's harshness is a disguise for hurt. The critic is defending their wound, the cynic is guarding their fear, the cruel are often carrying unbearable shame. The practice, then, is not to stop judging, it is to listen to your judgments until they reveal their origin. Every time you feel hatred rising, treat it as a mirror. Ask, what is this showing me about myself? In that moment, you reclaim power from the unconscious. You stop being a slave to reaction and become a student of awareness. What we condemn in others is never about them alone. It is the language of the hidden self, asking to be seen, forgiven, and integrated. The real transformation begins not when you see through others, but when you finally see through yourself, and realize that the war you've been fighting out there was always a reflection of the one within. Silence is not empty. It is full of meaning that words cannot hold. Most people listen to what is said, yet the truth often hides in what remains unspoken. Language is clever, but silence is honest. We have been trained to fill every pause, to smooth over discomfort with explanations and noise. But beneath those small hesitations and careful answers, there is always something trembling, something that wishes to stay unseen. Nietzsche understood this well. He saw that words often serve the herd, not the soul. People speak to belong, to survive, to be understood by others. But silence, when it appears, exposes what lies beyond the surface of the social self. When someone hesitates before answering, when they suddenly change the subject, when their voice goes soft or their eyes turn away, something deeper is moving. That stillness is not absence, it is presence trying to hide. Every pause is a confession. Every moment of avoidance carries a story. When someone cannot speak about a topic, they reveal the very place where their truth lives. You can learn more from a quiet breath than from 100 loud opinions. Listening, then, becomes a sacred act of awareness. To truly understand another, you must listen not only with your ears but with your attention. You must feel the rhythm beneath their words, the way silence expands like a shadow behind what they say. In a world that glorifies talking, the art of listening is revolutionary. We fear silence because it forces us to confront what cannot be disguised. Yet silence, when met with awareness, becomes a mirror that shows us the soul behind the sound. The one who pauses before speaking might not be hiding deceit, they may be wrestling with truth. The one who dodges vulnerability may be protecting a wound, not performing indifference. If you are patient enough to see that, you begin to hear life more clearly, not as noise, but as subtle revelation. To grow in awareness, practice this. Next time you are in conversation, resist the urge to fill the quiet. Let the silence breathe. Notice the energy that moves through it. There, in the unsaid, lies the most profound understanding. The world rushes to express, but wisdom waits. The more comfortable you become with silence, the more you will hear. In your own life, too, silence is not something to fear. It is the ground where self-awareness grows. When you stop explaining yourself, when you sit quietly without defending or performing, you begin to meet your real thoughts. You notice the noise of insecurity, the longing for validation, the exhaustion of pretending. And beyond that noise, something still and clear remains. That is you, unmasked, unspoken, whole. So, listen deeply. In others, in life, and within yourself. The truth rarely shouts, it whispers. It hides in pauses, in glances, in breaths between words. Awareness means learning to hear that quiet voice, the one that does not demand attention but invites understanding. The more you honor silence, the more you realize it was never empty. It was always full, of everything you needed to know. There is a strange kind of purity in those who insist on being seen as pure. The ones who speak most loudly of goodness, who rush to correct, to moralize, to remind the world of what is right, often, unknowingly, reveal a quiet vanity underneath. Their devotion to virtue becomes performance. It is not that their intentions are false, but that their identity depends on being righteous. They cannot stand to appear flawed, because their sense of worth is built on the illusion of being beyond fault. Nietzsche saw this clearly. He warned that the will to purity can mask the will to power. When morality becomes a way to elevate oneself above others, it loses its essence and becomes ego in disguise. The person who cannot tolerate imperfection in others is often at war with imperfection in themselves. They have not accepted their shadow, so they paint over it with holiness. The louder the declaration of virtue, the deeper the hidden doubt. To live honestly, then, is not to proclaim one's goodness but to confront one's contradictions. Real morality is quiet. It does not need applause because it is not an act. It comes from a place of inner balance, not performance. The person who has made peace with their flaws has no desire to point out the flaws of others. They understand that moral posturing is just another form of insecurity, a way to hide the fear of being ordinary, mistaken, or small. Look closely at those who constantly speak of purity. Watch their eyes when they judge, when they condemn, when they position themselves as the light against another's shadow. There is tension there, a silent trembling behind certainty. The need to be good becomes a cage. It keeps them performing, forever afraid that if they stop, the truth of their humanness will emerge. But that truth is not ugly, it is freedom. To evolve is to allow the self to be complex, to admit that virtue and vanity can live in the same heart. Awareness does not erase imperfection, it holds it with compassion. You begin to see that your ego's need to be good is the same fear that drives others to hide behind masks. When you stop performing goodness, you begin to live it. When you stop trying to be right, you begin to see clearly. In silence, when no one is watching, that is where real virtue breathes. It does not demand recognition. It does not fear error. It simply exists, steady, humble, aware. The person who can face their own darkness without shame no longer needs to control how they are seen. They radiate something softer than righteousness, authenticity. So when you meet someone who preaches perfection, do not judge them. See the human beneath the sermon, the one longing to be loved even when flawed. The path to truth is not in being pure, it is in being whole. And wholeness is messy, tender, real. It is what remains when the mask of morality falls away, and the self stands, unguarded, in the warmth of its own awareness. People rarely lie to others before they've first lied to themselves. This is one of the most delicate truths of human nature, uncomfortable, yet deeply compassionate when understood. The words we speak are only the surface of our inner narrative, and often that story has been rewritten so many times we no longer know where truth ends and protection begins. When someone says, "I'm fine, I've moved on," or, "It doesn't matter," it's easy to take it at face value. But these aren't always attempts to deceive others. They are attempts to survive themselves. Behind these words lives the tender ache of a soul still healing, a person trying to stay intact in a world that often punishes openness. These small lies are armor, fragile shields built not out of manipulation, but of fear. Fear of collapse, of rejection, of pain returning. Nietzsche saw self-deception not as moral failure, but as an instinct of preservation. To live truthfully is to live vulnerably, and few can bear that nakedness for long. The mind learns to soften the edges of pain, to reshape memory, to edit experience until it feels survivable. What we call denial is often the psyche's way of buying time until the heart is ready to face what it once could not. When you begin to see this in people, judgment dissolves. The friend who insists they're over a heartbreak isn't lying to you, they're protecting the version of themselves still breaking. The colleague who boasts of control may be trying to silence their inner chaos. The person who avoids the truth doesn't always do so to mislead, they do it to endure. Their contradictions are not signs of deceit, but signals of inner conflict. And if we are honest, we see it in ourselves too. How many times have you said, "I'm okay," to avoid unraveling? How many stories have you rehearsed until you believed them, simply because the real one hurt too much to hold? We live in layers, each lie a soft blanket covering something we aren't ready to face. Yet awareness doesn't demand we rip the blanket away. It invites us to lift it gently, to meet the truth underneath with patience, not punishment. Growth begins when we stop seeing lies as evil and start seeing them as mirrors. Every falsehood reveals what we wish were true. Every inconsistency points to the place within us still seeking safety. The path of self-awareness is not about forcing truth but allowing it to emerge naturally, as the fear that once guarded it begins to fade. So, when someone's story doesn't add up, when their mask slips, pause before reacting. Look not for deceit, but for the wound beneath it. People who lie have not abandoned truth, they are circling it, cautiously, waiting for the courage to return. Compassion means recognizing that we've all done the same. To understand others deeply is to realize this: the lies that frustrate you are the same lies that once protected you. The work is not to expose them harshly, but to awaken softly, to help others, and yourself, remember that truth does not destroy. It frees. Where someone feels superior, they are often hiding a quiet sense of inferiority. The louder a person needs to prove their worth, the more fragile it tends to be. Superiority is rarely born from strength, it is born from fear. Fear of being unseen, unheard, unloved. Fear that without the armor of pride, one might dissolve into nothing. Nietzsche understood this paradox well. He saw arrogance not as confidence but as overcompensation, a trembling attempt to silence the inner voice that whispers, "You are not enough." The person who constantly reminds others of their accomplishments, who dominates every conversation, who seeks validation in comparison, is not expanding, they are defending. Their pride is not a mountain but a mask, crafted to hide the valley of doubt beneath. True confidence moves differently. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need an audience. It rests quietly in self-acceptance. When a person knows who they are, they no longer need to prove it. They do not rise by pushing others down, because their worth is not measured by hierarchy, it is measured by peace. Superiority thrives in the absence of inner safety. The child who once felt unseen grows into the adult who must be seen by everyone. The student who was punished for mistakes becomes the leader who cannot admit them. The voice that once trembled learns to shout. Every posture of control is a relic of survival. And yet, beneath the facade of dominance, there remains a deep desire to simply be accepted without performance. To read people wisely is to look past their armor. The one who boasts may not crave admiration, they crave reassurance. The one who corrects you may not need to be right, they need to feel safe. Awareness allows you to stop reacting to the performance and start seeing the person. When you stop engaging with their mask, something softens. Often, even in silence, they feel seen for the first time. The same truth applies inwardly. Notice the moments you seek superiority, the times you must have the last word, or feel irritated by another's success. These are not flaws to be condemned, but signals of an unmet need. Somewhere inside, a smaller version of you is still asking, do I matter? Healing begins not with judgment but with recognition. When you turn compassion toward your own insecurity, the urge to prove fades. There is quiet power in humility, not the kind that diminishes itself, but the kind that no longer fears being ordinary. To walk through the world without needing to be better than anyone is to finally rest. You begin to understand that dignity doesn't come from comparison but from presence. Behind every throne of superiority sits a frightened child wearing a crown too heavy for their head. The work of awareness is to take off that crown, not to lose power, but to reclaim authenticity. Because real strength doesn't dominate, it liberates. It allows you to stand beside others, not above them, knowing that in the grand truth of being human, no one is higher or lower, we are all learning to remember our own enoughness. Most human actions are not born from pure desire but from unseen fear. Beneath our ambitions, gestures, and words, there runs a quiet current of anxiety, the fear of being abandoned, rejected, forgotten, or found unworthy. We often call these motivations goals, choices, or personality, but in truth, they are strategies. Strategies to avoid pain, to secure belonging, to survive. Nietzsche saw fear not as weakness, but as the invisible architect of behavior. He understood that humans rarely act from conscious intention, they act from unconscious defense. The person who dominates conversations does not crave power, they fear being unseen. The one who constantly agrees, who says yes when they mean no, fears disconnection. The overachiever fears failure, the cynic fears hope. We are all, in some quiet way, protecting ourselves from the sting of loss. To live without awareness of this fear is to remain enslaved by it. We mistake our reactions for reality. We think we're choosing freely when, in truth, we are only avoiding the things that once hurt us. Every overreaction, every unnecessary defense, every restless pursuit hides a question we've never dared to face: what am I afraid of losing? When you begin to ask that question sincerely, something extraordinary happens. You start to see through your own disguises. You realize that much of what you chase, success, validation, control, is not desire but avoidance. You are not always running towards something, you are often running away. Awareness doesn't condemn this truth, it invites compassion. Because beneath every layer of fear is a story, one where you learned that love was conditional, that safety could vanish, that silence might cost you connection. By seeing fear clearly, you begin to loosen its grip. You stop mistaking anxiety for instinct, approval for love, and ambition for purpose. You begin to act not from reaction, but from clarity. You discover the strength that arises not from control, but from acceptance. Fear no longer needs to be fought or hidden, it needs to be understood. And in understanding, transformation begins. The next time you feel the urge to impress, to defend, to withdraw, pause. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of right now? You might find that beneath that fear lies the tender truth of being human, the longing to be seen without condition, to be loved without armor. Courage, then, is not the absence of fear, it is intimacy with it. It is the quiet choice to meet your fears with presence, to listen instead of run. Awareness is not about erasing fear, but about remembering that you are larger than it. When you can look directly at what frightens you and still act from love, you are free. Every act of consciousness is an act of liberation. Every time you name your fear instead of obeying it, you reclaim your power. You begin to live not as a reaction, but as a response. You begin to create, to connect, to choose, not to escape, but to express. And perhaps that is what Nietzsche meant all along, that freedom is not found in conquering the world, but in no longer being conquered by the quiet fears that built it.